On a chilly spring evening, Clara left the big city behind and settled in Riverside, a small town where she hoped to find peace. 4 years she had worked as an emergency paramedic, a job that had left her not only physically exhausted but also deeply scarred emotionally. The weight of recent events had shaken Clara to her core. A failed rescue operation had shattered both her professional confidence and her personal life. The tragedy had forced her to step away from her career, and the relentless chaos of city life only deepened her need for a quiet place to heal. Clara had started working at an old medical clinic in Riverside. Dr. Henry, the town's veteran doctor, had given her a chance, allowing her to find purpose again in this small yet peaceful clinic. Riverside was a quiet town surrounded by dense forests. But while the town itself was serene, Clara remained uncertain. Could she truly heal here? Her first days in Riverside were challenging. Some of the townspeople welcomed her warmly, while others remained distant, wary of the newcomer. But Clara paid little attention to their attitudes. She had one goal: to rebuild herself and help people again. One evening she stopped by Riverside Diner, the town's popular meeting spot. The diner was owned by Lucas, a former Navy officer with a tough yet friendly demeanor. From the moment he saw Clara, he sensed she carried a different past. As they talked, Clara found herself forming a connection with Lucas. He noticed her guarded nature, the way she carefully chose her words, and he could tell she was hiding a painful history. Meanwhile, Clara saw in Lucas a man who was also trying to move beyond his past, searching for his own meaning in this quiet town. Clara was slowly adjusting to life in Riverside. The clinic was a stark contrast to the fast-paced environment she was used to in the city. Just a few patients a day, a calm atmosphere, and Dr. Henry's steady guidance. For the first time in a long while, she began to feel like she might finally find some peace. However, as she spent more time in town, she realized that even this quiet place had its own secrets and challenges. One day, a young mother burst into the clinic, immediately catching Clara's attention. Sophie had recently survived a difficult childbirth, but now she was deeply concerned about her health. With a heart condition that required constant monitoring, her nutrition was critical. However, finding the right food in the small-town markets was proving to be a challenge. Determined to help, Clara started considering solutions. Maybe I can find organic food at the nearby farms, she thought. But when she mentioned the idea to Dr. Henry, he hesitated. He warned her that the roads leading to those farms could be dangerous. Still, Clara was resolute. Sophie and her baby needed this, and she wasn't going to let fear stop her. That evening, she shared her plan with Lucas at Riverside Diner. As always, he listened in silence, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he leaned in slightly and spoke in a low, serious voice. "Those roads might be more dangerous than you realize. You don't know what's out there." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" Lucas hesitated before speaking again. His voice was quieter this time. "Years ago, a group running illegal operations used that area to hide. Some say a few of them might still be lurking around. That's why people avoid those roads." Despite his warning, Clara stood her ground. "Sophie's health depends on this. I'm going to get that food." Lucas studied her determined face for a long moment before letting out a sigh. "Fine. But you're not going alone. We leave early in the morning and I'm driving." At the break of dawn, Clara peered out the window just as the rumble of Lucas's truck engine startled her. The air was bitterly cold and the snow covering the ground had thickened overnight. She quickly grabbed her bag and stepped outside. Lucas opened the passenger door for her. "Are you still sure about this?" he asked. Clara offered a determined smile. "We have to do this for Sophie." The journey began in silence. As the truck navigated through the dense forest, Clara watched the scenery unfold. The golden rays of the sun filtering through the snow-covered trees painted a peaceful scene, but Lucas remained tense behind the wheel, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. His unease was contagious, settling deep within Clara. "What exactly goes on around here, Lucas?" she finally asked. Lucas exhaled slowly. "Years ago, some people used this forest for illegal business. They're not as visible these days, but there are still rumors that some of them never really left." Clara stayed quiet, not wanting to distract him, but an uneasy feeling began to settle in her chest. After a while, the truck suddenly jerked to a stop. Lucas gripped the steering wheel tightly before turning to Clara. "Stay here. Don't get out of the truck." Before she could protest, he was already stepping outside. Clara's eyes widened as she saw a heavy chain stretched across the road, firmly anchored to the ground. Lucas knew exactly what it meant. It was a warning, a clear sign to keep outsiders away. Just as he moved to unfasten it, two figures emerged from the trees. They walked with deliberate slowness, their presence exuding silent intimidation. Their rifles were clearly visible and their eyes were cold and calculating. Clara's heart pounded as she watched from inside the truck. After a while, the truck suddenly jerked to a stop. Lucas gripped the steering wheel tightly before turning to Clara. "Stay here. Don't get out of the truck." Before she could protest, he was already stepping outside. Clara's eyes widened as she saw a heavy chain stretched across the road, firmly anchored to the ground. Lucas knew exactly what it meant. It was a warning, a clear sign to keep outsiders away. Just as he moved to unfasten it, two figures emerged from the trees. They walked with deliberate slowness, their presence exuding silent intimidation. Their rifles were clearly visible and their eyes were cold and calculating. Clara's heart pounded as she watched from inside the truck. "What are you doing here?" one of the men demanded, his voice sharp and unwavering. Lucas raised his hands slightly in a show of calm. "Just heading to a farm. I've got a paramedic with me. We need to pick up food for a sick mother." The men shifted their gaze to Clara, studying her closely. "A paramedic, huh? And what exactly are you doing here?" the second man asked, his tone laced with suspicion. Clara swallowed her fear and steadied her voice. "Helping a sick mother," she answered firmly. She refused to let her nerves show. A tense silence followed. Then one of the men tilted his head slightly. "One of us is injured. Help him and you can go on your way." Lucas and Clara exchanged glances, silently weighing their options. Finally, Clara spoke. "Fine. But Lucas comes with me." The men exchanged a glance before nodding in agreement. Clara carefully followed Lucas as they moved toward the area the men had indicated. As they ventured deeper into the snow-covered forest, a small camp came into view. A handful of people were gathered, some standing watch, others preoccupied with various tasks. At the center of the camp, beneath a makeshift canvas tent, a wounded man lay on a stretcher. Clara took a deep breath and quickened her pace. When she reached the man's side, she immediately noticed his pale face and cold sweat beading on his forehead. One leg of his pants was soaked in blood. Lucas stepped closer to her and murmured under his breath, "Be careful. These people don't trust easily." One of the men near the stretcher frowned. "She claims to be a nurse. Can we trust her?" Clara met his gaze, unwavering. "If you want him to live, you need me." Without waiting for approval, she pulled on sterile gloves from her bag and examined the wound. The bullet had passed through the upper part of his leg, but the bleeding was severe. "The bullet is out, but there's significant tissue damage. If this gets infected, things will get much worse. He needs to be taken to a hospital," she added. Her words were met with silence. Then a man who appeared to be the leader of the camp stepped forward, his expression cold. "That's not an option," he said firmly. Clara's jaw tightened, but she knew there was no time to argue. "Fine," she relented. "But if I'm going to do this here, I'll need your help." As Clara prepared bandages and a tourniquet, Lucas followed her instructions, assisting as best as he could. Clara worked swiftly to prevent infection, carefully wrapping the wound with sterile bandages. All the while, the camp members watched her every move with wary eyes. Tension hung thick in the air. Clara turned to Lucas. Her voice was firm but reluctant. "I don't want to say this, but to stop the bleeding and prevent infection, we have to cauterize the wound." Lucas hesitated for a moment before pulling out a small knife from his pocket and handing it to her. Clara heated the blade over the campfire. As the metal glowed red-hot, an eerie silence fell over the camp. Everyone held their breath. "Are you ready?" Lucas asked. Clara, unwavering, nodded. This is his only chance. The moment the searing blade touched the wound, the man let out a sharp scream. His agonized cry echoed through the camp, startling even the birds in the distant trees. Clara remained focused, completing the procedure with precision. Finally, the man's breathing steadied. Clara wiped the sweat from her brow and looked at the gathered group. The bleeding has stopped. Now you need to keep the wound clean to avoid infection, she instructed. Clara took a deep breath as she finished her work, slowly wiping her hands clean. The injured man's breathing had steadied, yet the tension in the camp remained palpable. Lucas caught her eye and gave a subtle nod. We need to get out of here. Now. Just as they were about to leave, a piercing scream shattered the silence. Clara froze. Lucas's face darkened as he turned to her. This isn't our problem, Clara. But Clara was already moving, following the sound toward a nearby tent. Lucas groaned under his breath, realizing he had no choice but to follow. Without looking up, Clara simply replied, "We're going to do this together." The situation grew even more complicated as the baby's feet emerged first. Clara kept the mother calm, guiding her breathing and pushing rhythm. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then a tiny cry filled the tent. Relief washed over Clara. Exhausted but triumphant, she looked up. It's a boy. Tears streamed down the mother's face as she held her newborn in her arms. Lucas, who had been watching silently from the sidelines, finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual. You actually did it. Clara observed the emotional reunion, but something stirred deep within her. For a brief moment she was lost in her own past, remembering a loss she rarely allowed herself to think about. Lucas saw it. He noticed the way her eyes glistened, the way her shoulders tensed. Slowly he stepped closer and spoke softly. You gave them life, Clara. And nothing can take that miracle away. As Clara and Lucas prepared to leave the tent after the birth, the camp leader appeared. You can't stay here any longer. You need to leave. Now. Without protest, Clara and Lucas made their way out, stepping onto the snow-covered path. A deep silence hung between them as they walked. After a while, Lucas broke the silence. This place is going to change you, isn't it? Clara exhaled, her breath visible in the cold air. Maybe it needed to. Maybe I needed to find myself. Their journey was filled with danger and uncertainty, but they both felt stronger now, more certain of who they were becoming. When they finally returned to Riverside Diner, Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. Lucas turned to her, a small, knowing smile playing at his lips. Clara, maybe you didn't come to this town just to fix your own life. She met his gaze and smiled. Maybe this is where my real life begins. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt a shift deep within her. The people of the town had witnessed her courage and sacrifice over the past few days. And somewhere in her heart she realized she truly belonged. Sparkles, if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next heartfelt tale. Smiling face with smiling eyes. Inside, a woman lay on the ground, writhing in pain. Beside her, a frantic man hovered. She's in labor, he blurted out. The urgency in his voice made it clear. The situation was critical. Inside, a woman lay on the ground, writhing in pain. Beside her, a frantic man hovered. She's in labor, he blurted out. The urgency in his voice made it clear. The situation was critical. Lucas exhaled sharply. Clara, you can't say no to this, can you? He asked, his tone edged with reluctant admiration. Clara's gaze was firm. When a mother and her baby's life is at stake, there is no saying no. Without hesitation, she knelt beside the woman and assessed the situation. The contractions were irregular, and a deeper look revealed a far more serious issue. The baby is in a breech position, Clara announced, her voice unwavering. This could put both of them at serious risk. She turned to the people in the tent. I need hot water, clean cloths, and a pair of scissors. Now. Lucas moved closer, his usual sarcasm creeping into his voice. So, what miracle are you planning this time?